Chainsaw Man chapter 133 just got dark and following the last chapter's reveal. We knew that it was going to be going in this direction, but knowing and experiencing it, there are two different things, because Yoshida is coming out of this chapter with some major heat, and at this point, if you're still rooting for that character, there's no way you can't convince me that you aren't evil. Yoshida threatening to kill Nayuta if Denji disobeys, and dangling Denji's hope for a normal life as incentive is some manipulation that goes into makima territory, which, given how skilled of a manipulator that makima actually proved herself to be, that's a half decent compliment depending on how you actually look at it. So my initial thoughts out of the way, let's back things up a bit and let's dive into the recap portion of the review before we further unpack things towards the end of the video. So the chapter opens up with us learning that the world is way more divided when it comes to Chainsaw Man than we ever imagined. We have people calling for Chainsaw Man to be viewed as a devil who deserves to be killed by public safety, but we also have the people who are part of the Chainsaw Man cult who are fighting on behalf of Chainsaw Man to keep him alive. These people are either younger people who are hardcore Chainsaw Man fans, or they're victims of devils, and by extension likely people who Denji saved in the past. Their numbers have grown to well over 20,000, and the politicians see the change in the direction coming, and they realize they need to start giving money and supplies to the churches that are worshiping Chainsaw Man, because the people in this cult, they're almost a voting agent. One thing we know about politicians is that them doing anything for a vote is about as much of a guarantee as us having to pay taxes every year. However, as Yoshida explains all this to Denji, we see that Denji is a simple man. While it was cool at first for Denji to hear that there are people who are fighting over him, Denji grows very tired of hearing everything, and he demands to know what he has to do to actually see Nayuta and their dogs again, and that's where we get our first major bombshell in the chapter. Denji is told that for the price of seeing Nayuta again, it is to never transform into Chainsaw Man ever again, and if he defies this, it will directly result in Nayuta being killed and her having her corpse shown to Denji as a result of his defiance. It's then that we see Yoshida take things a step further by saying that he knows Denji longs to live a normal life and begins to use Denji's dreams for normal life as a way to make him do what he wants, while maintaining his leverage that Nayuta will die if she defies him. He even chooses some very cryptic words by stating that Denji, for him, this is his chance to actually be human again, which I found to be very telling by Fujimoto. One thing that we consistently seen with Denji since part 1 is that there's a constant theme of people dehumanizing him, treating him less than, or referring to him as less than. Even in the very first chapter of the series with the Yakuza, they didn't even view him as being human, despite him at the time not being a devil-human hybrid. We're seeing Yoshida join that long list of people who have continued with that same trend with Denji, and despite Denji at times coming across like he's not the sharpest knife in the drawer, even Denji on some level has to have picked up on this pattern. However, it's after Yoshida dangles the potential of living life as a normal human in front of Denji that we see another change occur in Denji, and this one's actually alarming. He flat out says he doesn't want to stop being Chainsaw Man, but he also doesn't want to see Nayuta die, and we see the internal turmoil of his character via the pain expressions on his face. It's a great example of when a writer has a strong internal conflict that clashes with an equally strong external conflict in a way where they play off of each other. Denji wants the clout that being Chainsaw Man can give him, as well as that fleeing feeling that he gets when people are loving Chainsaw Man, but he also wants Nayuta to stay alive, and we can see that Nayuta has dug a huge hole deep inside of Denji's heart, and he does not want to lose her under any circumstances. It's then that Denji says that he can't choose between the two options, so he declares he wants two choices, and when he has Yoshida pushed back against him, Denji calls for the protesters to kill Yoshida, but before Yoshida can push things even further, we hear Nayuta call out to Denji. This is where we see more of Yoshida's emotional manipulation plan, because after Denji and Nayuta reunite, we learn that Denji met Nayuta too soon, which means that he was planning to introduce Nayuta likely at the same time he was going to threaten to harm her while he was speaking with Denji in order to get him to go along with his plans. Not one to be outdone, Yoshida still threatens Nayuta's life, this time where she can hear him, and Nayuta just goes off, telling Denji to tell Yoshida to just go off himself or F himself, which is very interesting that actually didn't get actually spelled out. Like, we've seen other words used in Chainsaw Man before. I don't know if maybe they didn't want to have Nayuta drop an F-bomb because she's a kid, but we've seen worse in other manga done by Viz, so that was interesting. However, here's the thing. The chapter ends off with Yoshida Yoshida, watching as Denji and Nayuta leave walking together, and Yoshida wonders if Denji truly understood the severity of the situation that he actually found himself in. Now, with the recap portion done, there's actually a lot that we got to unpack here. I definitely think that Fujimoto made the smart decision by giving Denji the ultimatum. It sets up the two dual interconnected conflicts moving forward, and you have to believe that if public safety is going to be potentially after Denji and Nayuta, this is a way to force Mitaka to learn the truth about who and what Denji truly is, as well as to stir up some conflict between Mitaka and Yoru. I think the other interesting thing is that Fujimoto once again chose to utilize Yoshida in a setting where he's sitting down at some establishment right before he drops tension into the story and uses Yoshida for it. We see when he first used the octopus tentacle to snatch away Denji when he was about to reveal himself and talk to him afterwards when they're sitting down at that tea shop together. We then jump forward a bunch of chapters and we see Yoshida speaking with Fami at another sit down shop again, and now Denji and Yoshida are shown sitting down at some type of a sideways shop with the backdrop of the protesters fighting against each other, all while Yoshida takes time to show Denji that his selfish desires to be Chainsaw Man have come with some negative consequences. Essentially, we see the other side of what we were shown towards the end of Chainsaw Man Part 1 and early Part 2, which is that while there are a lot of people who love themselves from Chainsaw Man, there are still those who both fear him as well as just plain hate his guts. The interesting thing about this is that Fujimoto chose to reveal just one chapter after we learned that Isayume and Fami were behind the Chainsaw Man cult, and now we're getting confirmation that public safety has other plans for Denji as well. This isn't just a subversion of our expectation, but this is just a good old-fashioned redirect to get the story on more solid footing while also keeping the reader guessing of what will happen next, all while making us feel more sympathy for Denji as a character and playing off the fact that we have over 90 chapters of development with this character in Part 1 of the story. Meanwhile, Fujimoto is taking every opportunity to give Yoshida more heat, having him try to emotionally manipulate Denji in a way similar to what Makima did, while also making it clear that he isn't necessarily Makima. There's a duality when it comes to Yoshida that has to be considered here. Is he scum for trying to use Nayuta's life to manipulate Denji? Absolutely, but we also know he isn't some secret devil, because it does feel like he's sincerely trying to act in a way that will prevent the Nostradamus prophecy that Fami told him about from ever happening. But those two things, they aren't mutually in the same line of priority. Think of it like having a bank account at your local bank and you have multiple savings accounts for different goals as well as your checking account. So you got your day-to-day spending, then you got the account where you're saving for a car, then you got the account you're saving for a house or you're saving for a vacation. Well, it's the same thing here. I think this mucking up the story, which it is intentional and it's not a bad thing despite how that sounds, it's what allows Yoshida to serve as being the perfect person to be the foil for Denji. He's the one best suited to make Denji's mental state of mind collapse. He's the one best suited to get Denji so worked up when he has to choose between being Chainsaw Man and protecting Nayuta. However, it does make me wonder truly if there wasn't something else to Kishibe giving Nayuta to Denji to raise, and here's why. That panel where Denji looks so overjoyed as he's seeing Nayuta is alive and well and holding her in his arms right after he was just threatened with her life, it shows that Denji has someone worth caring for and protecting. He now has a thumbscrew, and as the 48 Laws of Power says, every man has a thumbscrew, a weakness that you can exploit if you know where to find it. Denji, upon the battle with Makima, lost both Aki and power at that point, and now he's lost Makima. In the eyes of those watching, including the bosses above Kishibe, he had no one else left to cling to, which means he was now a lone wolf, and a lone wolf is dangerous because it has nothing to lose. It cannot be controlled. By giving Denji Nayuta to raise, you've now created your own thumbscrew for Denji. Nayuta is the one thing that Denji will always come back to and will always have at the front of his mind in a very twisted way. It's another form of control by giving Denji someone to love, but we see in this chapter that it isn't Yoshida that is the right person to address that weakness of Denji. And when you pull a move like this, you can't miss, because now Denji knows he has to be careful when it comes to Nayuta's safety, which is why in that moment at the very end between Denji and Nayuta, it's very heartbreaking, because you know at some point Fujimoto is going to make Denji suffer when it comes to Nayuta. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. And that's gonna be my chapter question, you guys. Do you guys agree with me that there was some other reason that Denji was given Nayuta? Was this given to him as a a way to control him. And what do you think Denji will do? Will he give up being Chainsaw Man, or will he continue to be Chainsaw Man and just buck the system and protect Nayuta at the same time?